Hi, my name is Maricel Lopez, and I am your second grade math virtual content specialist. In the past, we have learned how to implement different routines, such as which one doesn't belong and the three reads routine. The purpose of this video is to help define the capturing quantities routine and identify its purpose, as well as help you effectively implement it in your class. Let's get started. What is the capturing quantities routine, and how will it help my students in math? Well, the capturing quantities routine is an instructional routine designed to focus students' attention on important quantities and relationships in problem situations. The goal of the routine is to develop students' ability to reason abstractly and quantitatively, and it also can be aligned to a specific lesson. Before delving any deeper into this routine, it is important to define these two words for your students. The first word is quantity, which means a number with a unit or label, and it has a role in the story or word problem stem. And the second word is relationship, which means a connection between two or more quantities in the word problem stem. When learning to ride a bike, you've got to practice, practice, practice. I've said it time and time again. The same is true with this routine. It is important to practice it often with your students, thus enhancing their analytical and computational skills. This is the infographic that goes along with the capturing quantities routine. Let's take a look at this infographic. The purpose of this infographic is to show you the flow of the routine. So it says capturing quantities. 1. Launch routine, thinking goal, reasoning quantitatively. 2. Identify quantities and relationships. Then here we see some icons. We'll talk a little bit more about those icons later. 3. Create diagrams. 4. Discuss diagrams. 5. Reflect on your thinking. Each of the icons on this infographic represent an action that students should take. The first icon illustrates that it is time for the student to think independently. It's time for them to ask themselves questions. The second icon illustrates that it is time to discuss. You want to pair students to have discussions about their strategies at this time. The 4Rs icon means the students have to repeat, rephrase, reword, and record. As the teacher, you can help students better understand information when asking questions such as, who can repeat what Jill said? Can you say it a different way? This is especially helpful for students who are English language learners and may have difficulty processing language. Since they hear the same information in different ways, it allows students time to process the information and make meaning of it. Fourth icon, annotate. Help students organize their thinking on paper, usually in the form of mathematical models or diagrams. These can be tape diagrams, groups, or charts. These annotations are not just for others to be able to understand the student's thinking, but also so that the student himself or herself can refer to it later. This icon represents that it is time for students to write independently. You may wish to provide sentence starters such as I notice, or one difference between blank and blank is, or I asked myself. This will allow students to write down their thoughts and noticings when identifying quantities and relationships between those quantities. And this last icon indicates that it is time for the students to share their findings with each other and record. If you have this infographic, it should be posted as a visual reminder to students of the actions expected during each step of the comparing quantities routine. You can even choose to enlarge these images and use them individually to give your students a visual reminder of the expected action at that time. We will now delve a little deeper into understanding the 5 components of the capturing quantities routine and how to effectively implement this routine in your class. When presenting this routine to your class, it is important to inform your students the what and the why of the Capturing Quantities routine. Students should be informed that the routine involves looking for quantities and relationships in word problems and finding ways to represent them. Students should also be informed that the reason we do this routine is to think like mathematicians. Mathematicians find quantities and relationships in word problems and diagrams. In step number 2, which is to identify quantities and relationships, you want to begin by presenting a word problem stem such as this one. It is the blue font at the bottom. Let's read it together. 2 groups of friends are sharing chocolate bars. Each group wants to share the chocolate bars fairly so that every person gets the same amount and no chocolate remains. In the first group of friends, 4 students receive 3 chocolate bars. Notice that this word problem does not have a question just yet. You want to delay presenting a question. What you want to do instead is encourage students to think about this question independently first. What can I count or measure in this situation? Sample sentence starters are, I can count the number of blank, or I can measure the amount of blank. In this example, there are several quantities such as the number of chocolate bars, the number of groups, and the number of people in each group. The relationships in this problem are the total number of people sharing the chocolate, the part of the total chocolate that each friend receives. After the allotted individual thinking time has passed, you will then give an opportunity for students to engage in conversation with a peer. They discuss and compare each other's identified quantities. At times during this conversation, student B may help student A identify a quantity that maybe student A did not see at first or did not deem to be important. A lot of rich conversation derives from this partner conversation. The next step is for students to create a diagram to organize the information that they were able to identify from the word problem stem. Students should be asking themselves the following question. How can I represent the important quantities and relationships? Once again, you want to provide time for students to think independently. That's why we see this icon over here. And when drawing their diagram, students should be asking themselves the following questions. How did you represent blank? I showed blank by blank. Feel free to also pose these questions to your students as well. After the allotted time for independent thinking has passed, you may even ask students to work together to create a collaborative diagram without numbers or labels and have the class identify how the quantities and relationships were represented. When the partner work time has passed, you want to take student responses and put together a chart showing all of the possible diagrams created by student partners. During this step of the routine, the teacher has put together various student diagrams for students to compare and contrast. Students engage in individual thinking time once again. They ask themselves questions such as, what quantities or relationships do you see in this diagram? Where do you see a quantity or relationship in this diagram? Notice the symbol for the 4 R's. During this step of the routine, students are rephrasing and or rewording their classmates' responses or diagrams. At this point of the routine, you can also pose the question for the word problem. In our example, our word problem stem about the chocolate bars, the question is, how much chocolate did each person get in the first group? Students should select which diagram works best for answering that question. The final step of the Capturing Quantities routine is to reflect. You want to allow students individual writing time in which they can write a written reflection to one of the following sentence starters. When looking for quantities in a word problem, I learned to blank. When analyzing a diagram, I learned to pay attention to blank because blank. When identifying relationships, I learned to ask myself, I hope this video has helped you as an educator understand and effectively implement the Capturing Quantities routine in your class. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.